Hey, just before we start the show, I just want to let you know we've got a new feature here that allows you to leave us a recorded message. I know sometimes there are things we're going to say on the show that you take issue with, that you agree with, we've missed the point, whatever it might be. So it's simple. Just go to the show notes and you'll find a link there that allows you just hit the record button, have your say, and it'll land in our inbox. And we'll probably include it in upcoming shows. So thanks for doing that. Now here's the show.
An original
from Story Studio Network.
Well, here we go. It is the Wednesday of this week. It's November the 22nd. In case you're keeping notes at home, it's still 2023. Flip the calendar in what? 5-6 weeks? Wow. I know people were talking about how 2020 was the worst year ever. No, then 2021 was the worst year ever. No, you know what? I think 2022 was even worse. 2023, we're bouncing back. It's going to be curious to see, with everything that's going on in the world, how 2024 shapes up. Whether it's the economy we're talking about, whether it's tensions around the world, the Middle East, Europe. I read this frightening analysis on foreignpolicy.com a couple of days ago, yesterday. And it was written by a former assistant secretary of state for Europe and Eurasia in the Trump administration. And the headline said it all. The Americans are headed towards or on the verge of a war that they're very likely to lose. And that war would be facing off with China. And yes, he served in the Trump administration, but the analysis and the logic behind it had no resemblance of Trump logic or analysis at all. That's what made it more concerning. Because you looked at it and, the Americans have a skin in the game in the Middle East. They've got skin in the game in Ukraine. And if they had skin in the game, something that's going on in Asia, all of a sudden, all of their defense resources are stretched fairly thinly. And the point of the analysis was the Russians, Hamas, and China only have to worry about resources in their own region. So they can concentrate everything there. And he offered us a fascinating, scary statistic of the degree to which the Chinese Navy is growing. It's like 2.5 times the rate of the American Navy right now. So here's hoping 2024 settles down, because right now, as we wind up these final weeks of 2023, things are a little grim in a different way than we've had the last few years. By the way, we do have that feature on the show, and if you want to make a comment and you want to have your voice included in the show, go to the show notes, and there's a record your message button there, and just leave us a voice message. And if you've got something to say about the topic of the day or something we missed, you want to disagree, add a point, by all means do so. And we're going to start sprinkling those comments into the show. So we've just set this thing up, so get in there and leave us a note, leave us a message, and we want to include that in future episodes of Now and Next. We're going to do the same thing with On the Ledge, the Ontario Politics podcast, which tends to get a lot more opinion in some cases when we start talking with Doug Ford. Don't know why. Okay, here we go. I was chatting yesterday. We talked yesterday to Ujwal Arkalgud about the rise of illiberalism and how we all kind of are basing our politics now less on political stripe and more so on how we experience life and our set of beliefs and so on. And he made the point that so much of it is driven by a stress level we're feeling to some degree throughout the economy. And part of it he pointed to and said, it's this whole emergence and revolutionizing the workplace with AI. And we've talked a lot about that in the last year. Maybe 2023 is the year of AI in terms of its explosion and emergence, because who was talking about Chat GPT, a year ago? Well, here we are now, and it's just become this phenomenal part of our culture, part of our business, our economy, everything. And at one point, we were saying, this thing is just evolving before our eyes. It's just multiplying, and so on. Well, the only thing that has evolved more quickly than Chat GPT itself have been the developments at OpenAI. And OpenAI, of course, is the company that set up Chat GPT. And it's been a real intrigue in the boardroom. And it's been fun to watch from, kind of an entertainment point of view. But there are implications in terms of all of the things that AI is doing, and certainly ChatGPT. So I thought it was time to reach out and connect with Ritesh Kotak. He is our cybersecurity and analyst and a lawyer here in Toronto. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Dave?
I'm okay, but even the head spinning from last Friday to as we record this on Wednesday morning, Sam Altman is back in the CEO chair at OpenAI. Now, if you haven't really been paying attention, you might have missed everything that was going on in between. But he got fired on Friday for some really vague reason by the board. And what I didn't realize until I started looking into this, this is sort of an unusual governance setup at OpenAI, in as much as the board that was there really didn't represent what we'll call stakeholders or investors. And they had a whole lot of power in terms of how they could run the company, insist on how the company was run, who they could hire, who they could fire. But it is essentially a not-for-profit setup. So there's a lot of worms in this can, and I'll let you take it wherever you want. But, my first thought is everybody looked at this in terms of its effect on the AI industry itself. Microsoft had an interest, and of course, if it became destabilized, they'd be worried about it. What was at stake here by kind of blowing up the C-suite?
Everything was literally at stake here. If we think about, it's not just OpenAI. If we just look at it from the perspective of this emergence of artificial intelligence and who they had at the helm, Sam Altman was a force to be reckoned with. Nobody was talking about Chat GPT. And by the way, GPT is the actual technology. And if we kind of break it up, what does GPT stand for? Stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. So generative, the fact that it can generate stuff for us, pre-trained, because it goes on stuff that it's learned, different sources that it's essentially crawled and has been able to digest, and then transformer, which is essentially like the infrastructure, the language. And the chat portion of it, the ability to prompt and get these responses, is what actually blew up. Now, chat, like GPT related technology, I remember my first time getting a demo of this was back in 2018, 2019, where you could literally go in and write a prompt saying, copy this website or recreate this website for me, or make me a particular app, and voila, it would start generating. It wasn't quite to the point where it is today, but this is technology that's been kind of in the works for a while now. And then comes Sam Altman, where he's able to really revolutionize, commercialize in some cases, this type of technology to a point that no one's ever seen before. And this was significant. And if we just think about the fact that once he was fired, essentially, he walked out the door, where did he go? He went to Microsoft for all but 5 minutes before coming back to
that was a head spinner.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Well,
right?
I saw that tweet by the CEO, and I was like, okay, well, this is a natural fit. I was even asked in another interview, Ritesh, where do you think he's going to go? I was like, well, I don't think he's going to. He has the option of starting up a competitor, but I don't know if he could do that. I kind of predicted that if he was going to go anywhere, it was going to be Microsoft. And the reason for that was just about 2 weeks ago, those major announcements at their developer conference around the future of OpenAI. And what was front and center was their partnership with Microsoft. In fact, ChatGPT is built on Microsoft's cloud infrastructure called Azure. And we're talking like a $10 to $16 billion partnership here. So it only seemed natural that that is where Sam Altman was going to go. But then you had this situation which was just absolutely bonkers, where 730 plus employees out of 770 signed a letter. That's 95% of the company signed a letter and said, unless you bring them back and change the board up, we're out of here. And I think they kind of forced the board's hand. So you're right. I think this was a roller coaster. I remember getting a push notification on my phone saying the OpenAI board has lost confidence in Sam Altman. And then I was like, well, this is different. This is interesting. I got to read more. And the more I read, and as the time progressed up until the recording of this segment, there's been so many evolutions, so many changes. I think the statement as of 6 hours ago of our recording was that Sam Altman is back. Wow. Like, just wow.
Mm-hmm. Well, back, and there's a new board, and there's a process under place to, create a longer term new board. But what I found really interesting in all of that, and back to the Microsoft part of it, was they obviously a lot of money invested and time and energy in that partnership. They had no idea that the board was firing Altman.
Nope. Nobody had any idea that the board was firing Altman, probably except the board.
Probably,
who knows?
Maybe not even him.
Yeah. Who knew what was going on behind closed doors? And if we kind of think about, the board has a fiduciary duty to the organization, to any organization. If you're a board member, if you're an employee, you have a responsibility. If you're a board member, your responsibility is essentially elevated, and that's where the fiduciary responsibility comes from. So that's the responsibility. And if you kind of look at their mandate and kind of some of the reporting that's been going on, there was a lot of talk around trustworthy AI and safe AI. And there's a speculation that OpenAI might have, and the board might have seen something that made them pause and say, well, that's not what we signed up for. But we're just speculating, because a lot of these in-camera sessions are confidential. We'll never hear, exactly what happened. We can only speculate unless we hear it from a direct source that was there. But that would probably lose confidence in a CEO if you say that I'm going to update the board, I'm going to be doing certain things, and then all of a sudden you say you're going to do Y, but you do X. That could mean a loss of confidence. There could be other reasons, but this was an extreme. Like, this went from I don't even want to say 0 to 100, like 0 to 1,000,000, right away at the snap of a finger. And it seems to be calming down. But yeah, no one knew. Not Microsoft. They clearly put out, I think it was the CEO put out a message on kind of their concerns around it. Other CEOs raised concerns. There was a lot of interviews that were given over the weekend. I think that people were really busy talking about the impacts that this was going to have, but no one knew. Like, literally no one knew. If you told me on Thursday that this was going to happen on Friday and you were going to bet me, I would have taken the bet.
Well, then you would have had to double down to say he would have been back in the chair less than a week later.
Yeah, double or nothing. Yes, let's just.
That's right. Give me the big picture here. I mean, I realize where, the Microsoft's interests are. Specifically, there's a commercial interest there. But if I read it correctly, this kind of all started around that idea of safe AI, that there was something, ethical guardrails that we were going to take into consideration when we were developing this. At some point, his departure didn't matter what the board would have said in the wake of that. That would have jeopardized that mission entirely.
Yeah, if we kind of even think about what on earth is trustworthy AI or the ethics of AI, that in itself would probably be in a 1 hour segment, which at some point maybe we should actually do. But it's not so much what we're seeing now. And I know there's a lot of talk around bias that's potentially baked into AI. And there's this talk around AI hallucinations as well. There was a recent example where lawyers, of all things, decided that they were going to use ChatGPT to write some sort of court document, and it literally made up case law. It made up cases that never existed because it's trying to Again, generative pre-trained transformer. It's trying to go on what it knows and answer the question that it's been posed. So there's been a lot of question around the viability and also around the sustainability of this type of technology, but I'm not too concerned about that. What I'm more concerned about when it comes to the ethics is what's next. And there's been a lot of talk around multimodal outputs as well. So imagine the ability to have a picture and say generate another picture. That's instead of Ritesh is Dave on a trip in Paris or something like that. Or here's a video and I want you to edit out Ritesh and put Dave instead. And you can see the easier that this type of technology gets and the harder it is to detect, and we still don't have safeguards really around it. Like, if I was to take a video that was generated using artificial intelligence and upload that onto a popular social media platform, it doesn't get tagged. Political ads
Mhm.
get tagged as political, or I could look at a particular ad or a particular content and see why I was targeted with that. But at no point is there some sort of label that says that this is not a authentic photo. This is a generated image or video or audio, as we've seen as well. There was that interview that 11 Labs put out, a fake interview with Joe Rogan and Justin Trudeau a few months ago, and to the average person, if I didn't give you context that this was a fake generated interview, you wouldn't know the difference. So this is where it's getting into the realm of what do we do? It's clear the laws have not caught up to the technology. So we do have laws in place when it comes to revenge porn or intimate images, but it talks about intimate images. But if I was to take your face and put it on a particular, generate a nude, for example, what do I do? Like, I'm clearly been victimized, and what happens? And it's getting even easier to do this stuff, even harder to identify it. And if you start going too far ahead without having those checks and balances in place, that causes problems. And I think that seems to be the big issue around this is, yes, AI is a new arms race, but what protection mechanisms and safeguards need to be put in place, or are we putting the cart before the horse?
Yeah, I was saying yesterday we were talking about the development of AI and how it's just going to be culturally ingrained, and we're just going to have to get used to the fact that it's here to stay. What do we do with it? And I said, yeah, but right now it feels a little bit like, I have a lighter, which is great because I have fire and heat, but I've given it to a toddler, so I'm not sure I would want that yet. We'd have to obviously be paying attention to how this is being used. And you don't have to look any further than what's going on in the Middle East and a lot of the content in air quotes that's being generated around the conflict itself. How do you know what's real? How do you know it's not real? There's so many questions, and I'm glad people are at least asking that question now. Like, can I trust that video? Do we know that in fact that's authentic and genuine? And those things are happening in newsrooms as much as anywhere else. So at least I think to some degree there's a certain vocabulary now that we have to apply to AI in terms of how do we determine if in fact what we're seeing is really something that's authentic and real. So that's a step in the right direction, I think.
Absolutely. And I've actually been asked to fact check certain pictures or videos and identify its authenticity. It takes a long time. It takes a while, especially if you have a video. You got to find the exact location. You go on Google Street View. You see if there's other corresponding videos. You got to look at the video itself. There's also tools that can try to detect if there's certain anomalies. I think we saw this during the Toronto election, where a image was generated, and like I think it was like one individual had like multiple hands or fingers or something like that, where there or three. I think it was three hands if I remember correctly, and they're like, oh, clearly this has been AI generated, and that was a bit of an obvious one, but it's getting better and it's going to be even harder to detect. I guess my point is that when I was fact checking, it took me a long time to fact check. But when I was testing out different generative technologies, it took me seconds to generate. So how do we keep up? Unless there's better AI detection tools, Pandora's box has been opened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I closed the loop and asked then, is that the next step for an organization like OpenAI? I mean, is that does this need to be where they go? Because there's no other way. We're not going to regulate this in any way. There has to be some kind of technological solution as well.
And we are seeing technological solutions that are being generated by these organizations. Like GPT-0, I think, is one of them that was created to identify if ChatGPT was used in writing essays. And I think it was kind of built into different plagiarism tools that students had to submit their essays to, where it looks for plagiarism and the use of generative AI, because they're classifying it as plagiarism. I think there's a whole interesting debate around the copyright of this as well. In fact, 2 weeks ago, when Sam Altman delivered his big speech, he actually talked about the introduction of Copyright Shield. And I thought that was really interesting. Does that mean that if I'm a paid customer and I generate a document or something using OpenAI's tools, that I'm now the sole owner? Like, who has ownership? So I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. There are tools that are being developed, but the technology is outpacing it. And I think you're right around the regulation component here. It's going to be very difficult to regulate. Canada is taking we're going to regulate AI stance with Bill C-27. But other countries, if we look at the Biden and Harris administration and kind of the executive order that came out, it looks like they're looking at this from a sectoral perspective. And then you also have other countries that are users of AI. They don't actually generate tools to deal with AI. And I think they're just waiting to see what the rest of the world does. And the world's a big place. And, OpenAI is just one of many companies that are working on this. We also have states working on this as well, different countries, because they do see this as a competitive advantage in all elements, from national defense to just day-to-day operations. So, yeah, I think this is going to be a very interesting time. There's a lot more to come, but good luck regulating this. But we got to figure this out quickly.
So, is the OpenAI drama simply fodder for a future Netflix movie, or is this going to refocus the entire industry?
My mind went to Steve Jobs when I first saw this, and I was like, when is a Netflix documentary going to come out of this? Because this is just too good to be true. This was like real life drama just playing out on Twitter, because I was on Twitter, or I guess X. I should be correct here. The platform formerly known as Twitter. But there was a lot of drama here. Then I equated this to Steve Jobs and kind of his exit from Apple, kind of doing other stuff, and then coming back with a bang and turning it into a $1 trillion plus organization. Was this that moment that OpenAI needed? Which is going to be that turning point where they go from being great to being legendary.
Yeah, well, and just as you threw out that number around Apple, we should actually do analysis and sit down at one point and talk about where the big tech companies sit in terms of their value. And we're not far away from the day when there's the bank of Apple. Right. I mean, they're going to be a financial institution as much as they are a tech institution. Right. I mean, in some cases, they got more money than banks.
Well, that's the thing, right? They are getting into the credit card business as well in the United States. And this was a very interesting thing I heard from someone. They said, Ritesh, what's the biggest bank out there? Now, again, I haven't verified this, right? So just throwing it out there, but it was a very interesting concept. And I said, what's the biggest bank out there? And they said Starbucks. I was like, what? And they said Starbucks. People use real money. They preload these cards for $100 or whatever, and that money actually sits with Starbucks. What do you think they're doing with it? And again, I don't know the rules, the laws around that. I'm sure there's some securities related stuff potentially, but it was a very interesting concept that Starbucks probably has more cash because people have made these deposits and are just holding on to it instead of using their credit card. Why? Because they get points. They might get special offers. But on the flip side is technically if you have that money in reserve and and you're using it to build more stores and launch new products, and your customers are essentially financing your operations. It's a very interesting concept. So yeah, look, we've also seen big tech try to introduce their own currency as well, digital currencies, crypto related currencies. There was talk around Meta launching the Libra, which was kind of put on hold. We've seen Elon talk about this as well with X, and I'm not talking just about Twitter, the social media microblogging platform. I'm talking about this ultimate app that he wants to create. And in China, they got WeChat and WeChat Pay. So we are seeing this, right? And I think we're only steps away from big tech also being the biggest lender and the biggest financial institution in the world.
Yeah, so it begins to own everybody's debt, and the tech is the answer. The tech is the problem. It's just, well, okay, that's a complete 4-part series there. Ritesh Kotak, always good to talk to you. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, and that'll do it for us. Tomorrow on Now and Next, Julia Deans is the CEO of Habitat for Humanity Canada, and we're going to chat with her about the passing of Rosalind Carter. And the former First Lady passed away last weekend. And, of course, the Carters have a long history with Habitat for Humanity. They joined the cause after Habitat was launched, but by all accounts, they have emerged as the patron saint of Habitat. And they were here in Canada for the 150 celebrations out in Edmonton, and their objective while they were here was to build 150 homes in celebration of the Canada 150. So we're going to talk about that and maybe a little bit about some of the housing initiatives that weren't announced yesterday in the federal economic statement. So that's on the way. Coming up on Now and Next for Story Studio Network.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Hey, if you've got thoughts about the show, just leave us a comment and a rating wherever you're listening. And you can also have your say on the show. Just click the record your message link in our show notes. Leave us a comment. Chances are we'll include it in an upcoming episode, and we will definitely respond. Now and Next is produced by me, Dave Trafford, with support and patience of the entire SSN team. Thanks for listening.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.